Now welcome back to the Atari 1040STF restoration video. Now in the last video we took the system apart, gave it a nice clean, did some retro brighting, did even more cleaning, put the system back together, and it turned out pretty well. But we had some pieces missing, namely the missing keys on the keyboard, the floppy disk drive, the screws, and some other bits and pieces. So in today's video we are going to go ahead and finish off the restoration. So the first thing that I had to address was the keyboard and the missing keys. There's a few eBay sellers who sell individual keys, so I decided to buy the 3 that I was missing. This seller also provided the rubber suction cup and plastic mounts. One of my keys was missing both of these things, and the other had a broken plastic mount. In order to install the mount, I needed to turn the keyboard over and remove the motherboard. I only needed to lift one side of the motherboard to get the mounts in, and this was pretty easy. With that, now I can put the keys back on the keyboard. As a visual test, I noticed 2 things. First, I was sent the wrong key. This key should have been the Alt key, or alternate as it's known in the Atari ST keyboard. And second, this key is yellowed and really ruins the look. So I decided to remove all the keys that were a shade yellower than the others and whiten them up. This time I gave the keys a bath in just 3% hydrogen peroxide out in the sun for about 6 hours. More on that later. Next up was the floppy drive. I didn't want a regular floppy drive that I would never use, so I decided to pick up a Gotek drive with the HXC firmware on it that supports the Atari ST. For those that don't know, the Gotek will provide floppy disk emulation from disk images loaded from a USB device plugged into it. Now the problem that I had here is mounting the disk drive. I noticed one mount was completely missing and 2 of them had the bronze header removed, so I had to improvise a little. I found a few screws that I could install from the underside of the motherboard and slowly screwed them in. This actually ended up working quite well. The only issue I had was the missing mount. So I tried putting in the USB thumb drive in as a test, and I noticed that it did not move and it was quite stable. So this is good enough for me. Now also, keep in mind where pin 1 is on the Gotek drive as compared to pin 1 on the Atari ST. I had to reverse the floppy connector to match the pins. Don't just plug it in without checking first. You may do some damage to your Gotek or your motherboard. So during the restoration, I had run into some trouble. Namely, I couldn't actually get the Atari ST to sync with any particular display that I had in my house. In other words, I tried it with an RGB cable. I also tried using upscalers, for example, an XRGB FrameMeister. That didn't work either. Now, if you take a look at the pinouts from the Atari ST video port, you'll see there's 2 sync lines. There's a horizontal sync and a vertical sync. Unfortunately, 99.9% of displays out there don't accept this type of signal. They're looking for what's called a composite sync. Now, a composite sync is essentially when you combine the horizontal sync and the vertical sync together. But unfortunately, you can't just bridge those 2 particular signals together. It doesn't work like that. You have to build a circuit to actually manage that for you. Now, what I found out was if I take a look at my motherboard, the composite sync circuitry is actually missing from my particular revision of my motherboard. Now, I did some research and looked at different revisions of the same model of Atari ST, the 1040STF, and many of the other revisions have this circuitry. So what we're going to do is go ahead and add that particular circuit into our Atari ST. So back to the retro brighting and the keys. I brought them in from outside, cleaned them, and started putting the Atari back together. Immediately you can tell that the yellowing is completely gone. So let's take a look and see how things ended up now. The system booted up without any issues. The Composite sync modification I made works great as well. I tested it on a few different displays, they all worked. Finally, I can play games on a modern LCD display. But of course, I prefer CRTs. My Sony PVM shows a beautiful picture, and I couldn't be happy with how this looks. The Gotek drive works great. Overall, I'm very pleased with how this restoration turned out. This Atari was really meant for spare parts, and we've saved it and brought it back to life. And it's something that I'm very happy to own as part of my collection. Well guys, I hope you enjoyed the restoration video of the Atari 1040ST. I know I had some questions in the last video about retro brighting and what I used to actually do the retro brighting. I've actually left a link of the product in the description below, so check that out if you're interested. Any questions about the restoration, leave a comment below and I'll be happy to respond. As always, don't forget to rate, comment and subscribe, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Bye for now.